You walk out to your hydrangea, and there it is again. Big, healthy, glossy green leaves, bushier than last year, and almost no flowers. Maybe one sad bloom hiding in all that green. You water it, you feed it, you give it everything. And still it holds back. Here is what I need you to hear first. The problem is almost never what the plant labels tell you. It is not too little food. It is usually one quiet mistake made months ago, at the wrong moment, with the best of intentions. And I know that because I made that mistake myself, and I nearly lost a hydrangea I had grown for 11 years. By the end of this, you are going to read your own plant like a detective reads a crime scene. And I am going to hand you a fix that a Minnesota nursery stumbled onto by accident, one that can pull a second full flush of blooms out of a plant you already own, not a young one, the old, stubborn, established shrub you have babied for years. This works on that one too. So stay with me because the last clue is the one almost nobody gets right. Let me take you back to that summer I almost gave up on mine. I had a big leaf hydrangea by my back fence, the kind with the round mophead flowers that turn that unreal blue when the soil is right. For years, it was the showpiece of my yard. Neighbors slowed down to look at it. Then one spring, I got tidy. I got proud. I went out in April with my clean, sharp pruners, and I cut it back hard because it looked messy and I wanted a neat, shapely shrub. It rewarded me with the biggest, leafiest, greenest growth I had ever seen, and not one single flower. Not one. All season. I stood there in July, staring at that wall of leaves, absolutely convinced I had a nutrient problem. So I did what most of us do. I ran to the garden center, and I bought food. That was the second mistake, layered right on top of the first. And I want to walk you through exactly why, symptom by symptom. Because every wrong turn I took is a wrong turn I still see gardeners make in the comments of every hydrangea video online. So let us start with the most common symptom of all, the one you are probably looking at right now. Lots of leaves, few flowers. What is that plant actually telling you? Here is the trap. When a plant looks lush and green but refuses to bloom, our instinct screams that it needs more feeding. It looks so vigorous. Surely a little boost will tip it into flower. That instinct is exactly backwards, and it is the first clue you have to learn to read correctly. A hydrangea drowning in leaves with no blooms is very often a plant that has been given too much nitrogen, not too little food. Nitrogen is the first of the three big numbers on any fertilizer bag, and it is the one that drives leafy green growth. If you have been feeding a general lawn feed nearby, or a high nitrogen product, or if your hydrangea sits at the edge of a lawn you fertilize, that plant is being pushed to make leaves at the direct expense of flowers. The plant is doing exactly what you told it to do. It just heard the wrong instruction. The horticulture team at the University of Georgia Extension puts this plainly. They warn that excess nitrogen produces vigorous foliage and poor flowering in hydrangeas, and they specifically flag lawn fertilizer drifting into shrub beds as a hidden culprit. I read that years after my own disaster, and I actually laughed out loud. Because I had been feeding my lawn right up to the base of that shrub for a decade, and calling myself a careful gardener. So here is the fix, and it is almost insultingly simple. Stop feeding heavy nitrogen anywhere near the plant. If you feed it all, use a fertilizer where the middle number, the phosphorus, is equal to or higher than the first. A balanced slow-release feed rated something like 10, 10, 10 works, or better yet, one leaning toward phosphorus, applied lightly once in early spring. That middle number is the one that supports flower and root development. And the amount matters enormously. For an established shrub, a single handful, maybe a quarter cup of granular feed worked gently into the soil at the drip line in spring, is plenty. More is not better. More is exactly how you get the lush green wall of nothing I was staring at. Now, if you have already done this, if you know your feeding is right and you still have leaves without blooms, then good. Because that rules out the easy answer. And when you rule out the easy answer, you are left standing in front of a bigger, more uncomfortable question. If it is not the food, then something happened to the flower buds themselves. Something took them away before they ever had a chance. So let me ask you the one thing that unlocks this entire mystery. Do you know when your hydrangea makes next year's flower buds? Because here is the secret that changes everything. And almost no plant tag ever tells you clearly. Most of the classic mophead and lacecap hydrangeas, the big leaf types, the Hydrangea macrophylla family, set their flower buds in late summer and early fall for the following year. Read that again. The flowers you want to see next June are being built inside the plant this coming August and September. Those buds sit there on the stems all winter, tiny and waiting. They bloom on what growers call old wood, meaning stems that were already there the previous year. So picture what I did. I walked out in April, saw bare looking, twiggy stems, thought they looked dead or messy, and I cut them off. I was not pruning my plant. I was amputating every single flower bud it had spent the previous autumn making. The plant was not sick. It was not hungry. I had thrown next year's entire flower show into the compost heap with my own two hands, and then I blamed the soil. This is the single most common reason a healthy, well-fed hydrangea produces leaves and no flowers. Bad timing on the pruners. The Royal Horticultural Society in the United Kingdom is very direct about this. For big leaf hydrangeas, they advise against hard spring pruning precisely because it removes the wood that carries the flower buds. Their guidance is to leave the old flower heads on over winter, both to protect those buds from frost and to remind you not to cut too far. So how do you tell what kind of hydrangea you actually have so you never make my mistake? Here is the simple detective test. If your hydrangea blooms in early summer, in June, on stems that were standing there all through winter, it almost certainly blooms on old wood. Big leaf and oak leaf hydrangeas fall here. You prune these ones, if at all, right after they finish flowering in mid to late summer, never in fall, never in spring. If instead your hydrangea dies back more and blooms later, in mid to late summer, on fresh new stems that shot up that same year, it blooms on new wood. The panicle hydrangeas, the cone-shaped ones, and the smooth hydrangeas, like the popular white snowball types, fall here. Those you can cut back in late winter or very early spring, and they will happily bloom on the new growth. Get those two groups straight, and you have solved half of all hydrangea failures on Earth. If you have an old wood type, put the pruners down. Truly. The best pruning for most established big leaf hydrangeas is almost no pruning at all, beyond removing dead stems. When a stem is genuinely dead, it snaps clean and shows brown, dry pith inside. A living stem bends and shows green when you scratch the bark. Test before you cut, every single time. And here is the fix if you suspect you have been cutting at the wrong time. Simply stop. This coming year, do not touch it in spring, let it grow. Leave the previous stems standing. Wait and watch. In many cases, a single skipped year of pruning is all it takes for the plant to rebuild its bud bank and flower again. That is the quiet relief of hydrangeas. They forgive you if you just stop doing the harmful thing. But now we hit the clue that fooled me even after I understood pruning. Because that next spring I did everything right. I did not touch it. I fed it correctly. I waited. And I still got a thin, disappointing bloom. And that told me something colder and sneakier was at work. Something that strikes in the space of a single night. And by the time you see the damage in summer, the culprit is long gone. Let me tell you about the killer that leaves no obvious mark. You do everything right, you leave the old wood, you feed it lightly, and still the blooms come out thin, patchy, or missing. What robbed you? Very often the answer is a late spring frost. And this one is cruel because the damage happens weeks before you ever notice it. Those old wood flower buds start swelling and pushing out in early spring as the weather warms. They are tender, they are exposed. And then one clear, cold night in April or early May, after the plant has already woken up, the temperature drops just below freezing. That cold burns the emerging flower buds while leaving the tougher leaf buds mostly unharmed. So a few weeks later, the plant leaves out beautifully, looking healthy and strong, and you have no idea that the flowers were quietly killed in the dark. I have watched this happen in my own garden more than once. One morning in early May, I found the new shoot tips gone soft and brown, almost water-soaked looking, drooping like cooked spinach. I thought it was disease. It was frost. The extension horticulturists at Michigan State University document this pattern clearly for big leaf hydrangeas in northern climates. They note that the flower buds are far more cold sensitive than the plant itself, which is exactly why a hydrangea can look thriving and green yet flower poorly year after year in a spot that gets those late cold snaps. So here is the fix, and the timing is everything. Watch your local forecast from the moment your hydrangea starts pushing new growth, usually April into May, depending on where you garden. When a frost is predicted after the buds have started to swell, cover the plant for that one night. An old bed sheet, a light blanket, a frost cloth draped over the whole shrub and reaching the ground to trap the earth's warmth is enough. Take it off in the morning. That single night of protection can be the entire difference between a full bloom and a bare summer. And if your plant sits in a low spot where cold air pools, or against a wall that gets early morning sun that thaws frozen buds too fast, understand that location itself is part of the problem, and even a burlap screen on the coldest nights helps. And that leads us straight into the mistake I actually made, the one that cost me an entire year of blooms. But before I walk you through that, I want to share something that helped me go even deeper on all of this. If you have found yourself stuck in this cycle year after year, where you try something, you wait, and the blooms still disappoint, I put everything I have learned about diagnosing and rescuing struggling plants into a series of digital books called First Bloom, Deep Roots, and the Full Bloom System. Together, they walk you through exactly this kind of plant reading approach, step by step, season by season, for the plants most of us have given up trying to understand. The Full Bloom System in particular covers the second flush technique we are about to get into, in far more detail than I can fit into a single video. All three are available for $67, and you can find the link in the description below. Now, back to that pruning question, because this is where nearly every hydrangea heartbreak begins. Now, I know what some of you are thinking right now, because I thought it too, standing in front of my sad plant. You are thinking, this is all lovely for next year, but my hydrangea is old, it is already struggling, and I feel like I have already lost this whole season. I do not have time to wait a year to fix pruning or dodge a frost that already came. This next part is for you specifically. For the mature plant, the one you have poured years into, the one you are afraid is already too far gone this summer. Because you are not too late, not even close. Here is how you rescue an established, underperforming hydrangea in the middle of the growing season right now. First, get down and look at the base of the plant. On an old shrub, the center often becomes a tangle of thick, woody, unproductive stems that block light and air and stop putting out good blooms. You can renovate this gradually without shocking the plant. Over 2 or 3 seasons, remove up to 1/3 of the very oldest, thickest stems at ground level each year, cutting them right down to the base. This is called renewal pruning, and the Royal Horticultural Society recommends exactly this staged approach for old, congested big-leaf hydrangeas. You never take more than 1/3 in a single year, so you never lose all your blooms at once, and the plant responds by pushing fresh, vigorous, flower-ready stems from the base. In 3 years, you have a completely rejuvenated shrub without ever starting over. Second, and this matters more than most people realize, on an established plant, check the water at the root zone in the heat of summer. A mature hydrangea has an enormous appetite for water, and the classic midsummer symptom, the whole plant wilting and drooping in the afternoon heat, even when the soil is damp, is not always a watering emergency. Hydrangeas often flag in intense afternoon sun and recover on their own by evening as the temperature drops. If your plant is crisp and wilted in the morning too, then it is truly thirsty, and it needs a deep, slow soak at the base, not a light sprinkle on the leaves. A deep watering 2 or 3 times a week in hot spells beats a shallow daily splash every time, because it pulls the roots down deep where the soil stays cool and moist. Third, mulch. A 2 to 3 inch layer of bark mulch or leaf mold over the root zone, kept back a couple of inches from the stems themselves, keeps those roots cool and holds moisture through the hottest weeks. For a hydrangea, cool, consistently moist roots are the foundation of everything. I have watched a struggling old plant turn a corner within a couple of weeks of nothing more than a deep soak and a fresh ring of mulch. The recovery is real, and it is fast, and it does not require you to dig anything up or start again. So now you know the 4 wrong turns. Too much nitrogen, pruning at the wrong time, late frost on the buds, and an old, congested, thirsty plant. Fix those, and you will get your hydrangea blooming again. But blooming again is not what I promised you at the start. I promised you twice as much, a second flush, and that is the clue that hid from me the longest. The one that mainstream advice almost always gets wrong. The one that turns a plant that blooms once into a plant that blooms and blooms and blooms right through summer. Let me show you what almost nobody tells you. Here is the discovery that changed how I grow these plants entirely. For most of my gardening life, I believed a hydrangea bloomed once, and that was your lot. You got your show in early summer, the flowers slowly faded to papery brown, and you waited a whole year for the next round. That is how nearly everyone still grows them. And it is leaving half the blooms on the table. The turning point traces back to a garden in St. Paul, Minnesota. In the early 1980s, a plantsman connected to Bailey Nurseries came across a big leaf hydrangea growing in a private Minnesota garden that did something the textbook said was nearly impossible. It bloomed on old wood, like a normal big leaf, but it also bloomed again on the new wood it grew that same season. It was remontant, meaning reblooming. That plant was eventually introduced to the world in the year 2004 under the name Endless Summer, and it cracked open a truth that changed the whole category. A hydrangea, given the right trigger, can flower more than once in a single season. But here's the part that got buried, the part that even people who own these reblooming varieties usually miss. The rebloom does not just happen on its own. You have to trigger it. And the trigger is the exact opposite of leaving the plant alone. It is deadheading, done properly, at the right moment, so the plant redirects its energy from making seeds into making a second round of flowers. Now here is where almost everyone gets it wrong, and where I got it wrong for years. When people finally hear they should deadhead, they snip the faded flower off right at the top, just under the bloom, leaving a long bare stalk. That does almost nothing. Or they panic and cut way down into the plant, taking off healthy stems and next year's old wood buds along with the spent flower. Both are wrong. The real technique is precise, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. When a bloom fades and turns papery, follow its stem down with your eyes past the flower, past the first small set of leaves at the very top, down to the first large, healthy pair of leaves, and look for the fat, plump buds sitting in the joint where those leaves meet the stem. You cut just above that first strong pair of leaves and their buds, not higher, not lower. That cut tells the plant to stop pouring energy into ripening seed from the old flower and instead to fire up those waiting buds into a fresh new shoot and on a reblooming variety, a fresh new flower. Do this promptly, as soon as the first flush fades in early to midsummer, and you give the plant enough of the warm season left to build and open that second flush before autumn. Pair that cut with 2 supports and the second flush comes reliably. First, a light feeding right after that first deadheading, using that phosphorus-leaning fertilizer we talked about, never the high nitrogen kind, to fuel flowers rather than just leaves, just a small handful worked into the moist soil at the drip line. Second, and this is the piece the old growers knew, that modern quick guides forget, protect the plant from the fiercest afternoon sun during that summer reblooming window. Hydrangea comes from the shaded woodland edges of Japan and Eastern Asia, where it grew in dappled light with cool, moist roots. A plant baking in full, hot afternoon sun will abort a second flush to survive. Give it morning sun and afternoon shade, keep those roots cool and moist with your mulch and deep watering, and you remove the last thing standing between you and a second summer of flowers. And here is the quiet, generous truth underneath all of this. Even many of the older, classic big leaf hydrangeas, the ones sold long before Endless Summer, will push a modest second flush if you deadhead them this way and keep them cool and watered, because the reblooming trait exists in the species to some degree, waiting to be coaxed. It was there all along. The knowledge got buried under decades of advice that told us to simply leave hydrangeas alone and wait a year. Careful growers kept the real practice alive. That Minnesota plant proved it to the whole industry, and now you have it in your hands, ready to use this weekend. So think about what you are holding now. You know that a wall of green leaves with no flowers is a nitrogen problem, not a hunger problem. You know that most mopheads bloom on old wood, and that a spring haircut is a bloom execution. You know that a single frosty night in May can quietly steal a whole summer of flowers, and that one old sheet can save them. You know how to bring a tired, congested old shrub back to life over a few seasons without starting over. And you know the real secret, the proper deadheading cut, the phosphorus feed, and the afternoon shade that together pull a second full flush of blooms from a plant everyone else thinks is finished for the year. You do not have a brown thumb. You were just never taught to read what the plant was telling you. That is the whole thing. The hydrangea was talking the entire time in leaves and buds and wilt and timing, and now you can finally understand it. You are the kind of gardener who does not throw a plant away and buy a new one. You are the kind who kneels down, looks closer, and figures out how to save the living thing you have loved and tended for years. That is who this is for. So tell me one thing down in the comments. When you looked at your hydrangea today, which symptom did you actually see? Was it the lush green leaves with no flowers? Was it the soft brown drooping tips of frost damage? Or was it those papery, faded blooms just sitting there, never cut, quietly blocking the second flush from ever coming? Write it down for me. Tell me exactly what you are seeing on your plant, and tell me where in the world you are gardening from, because the frost timing and the sun changes everything, and I read every one of these. Leave that comment. I mean it. It helps me help you. And if you want to garden alongside people who have decided to stop guessing and start reading their plants, who look at a wilting leaf or a bare stem and actually know what it means, then come with us. Because next time I am going to show you the one watering mistake that turns hydrangea blooms muddy and brown at the edges in the middle of summer, the symptom that looks exactly like disease but is not, and the simple change that keeps the color clean and true right until fall. You are going to want to catch that one before the heat sets in. I will see you there. There's so much more your own plant is trying to tell you. Inside the Blooming Garden Circle, I pick up right where we just stopped, walking you through reading your shrub symptoms, clue by clue. And you can ask me your own question. A real person, me, answers you myself. You're never doing this alone. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen, and you can cancel anytime, one click. Now, your roses need the same care. In the next video, I'll show you the simple summer pruning that saves your second blossom and the mistakes that quietly steal it. It's starting right here.